81.
Good evening. Oh, y'all are sleeping tonight. Good evening. Good to see this good number that's with us tonight for our Bible study hour. We do want to go over, as we always do, a couple of things that we want to update everybody on. As far as the sick list, we are continuing to pray for Marty Jackson. His surgery is scheduled for still July the 15th, so we need to keep him and the Jackson family in our prayers. Also, we mentioned on Sunday Joey Wiles, that was a classmate of Bradley Ernest that was in a pretty serious accident, and he did pass away, and so we need to keep that family in our prayers. Also, Connie and Dennis Maxwell have been home and sick, but I think they are slowly getting better, but we need to continue to pray for both of them as well. Does anybody have an update on Pearl Van Dyke? She did go home, so I'm sure we need to continue to remember her in our prayers as well, but she is home from the hospital. On a happy note, we've been announcing Landry Wood has been sick and in children's, and that's my second cousin, but he did get to come home, and they moved back home from Nashville, and so he's got several more surgeries that he's got to go through, but they do think that the hardest part, he's out of the woods and he's moved back home. We actually helped them move Monday, and so that is a really great thing. I don't have anything else for the sick list. Does anybody have anything that we need to add, Miss Judy? Okay. Maddie. So that is a granddaughter of one of the friends of Miss Judy, and 13 years old, and found out she's got some heart trouble, so we need to keep Maddie in our prayers as she goes through that. Anything else that we need to add? Rodney? So we need to keep Sawyer in our prayers. That's Rodney and Donna's granddaughter going through some health issues and some things. We're going to be having to wear a heart monitor for a little while, but we hope that she continues to do well, and we'll continue to update you all when we have more information. Anybody else that we need to add tonight? I do have a couple of other announcements as well. One thing that is on my phone, so give me just a second. This is from Miss Tracy. Says, anyone that wishes to participate in the personality profile workshop with Miss Paula King, you need to sign up for that by tonight, and that is on the bulletin board in the foyer. The workshop will be July 18th, and it is a great thing for couples and parents. So if you have any questions about that, please see Tracy, but the night is the last night to sign up for that. Also, beginning next Wednesday evening, there will be some changes to the format of our Bible study hour. And so when we get here at 6:30, we'll go straight to class. And then what time do we come back? At 7:10, we'll be released back into here for the invitation and singing. And then we'll have our sick list and things like that at the end, just to give our teachers some more time in class. So starting next Wednesday night, when you come in here at 6:30, this is where the adult class will be, but you'll go straight to class. And then after, at 7:10, we'll dismiss to the auditorium for the invitation. Right, don't leave your kids in the classroom unless the teacher's in there. So teachers, you may want to make note of that as well. Is there any other announcements that we need to announce tonight at all? If not, we'll be dismissed to class. Oh, also, don't forget the college class is still going on. That's going to be in the old teen room. So the college class will also be on Wednesday nights as well. But let's go to God in prayer. God, we are so thankful for this opportunity to come together tonight to learn and study about your word, Lord. We're so thankful that we get that opportunity, Lord. And we just ask that you'll be with the teachers tonight, be with those that are listening, Lord. And we just ask that'll fall on open hearts and open minds as well. Lord, we tonight have mentioned many who were sick, have lost loved ones, and we know that you will be with them, Lord, and you just ask that you'll help us to be there for those people as well. And and restore them back to their health if it be your will. Watch over us and care for us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Had to swap microphones there. That other one was about to die on me, so we'll see how this one works out. But we got to hear from Chris last week. He led our study for us and got us through towards the end of chapter 5. We're going to be picking back up there at the end of chapter 5. I think Chris left off around verse 10 or so, if I remember correctly from watching it back. But verses 10 and 12, I don't want to say they're inconsequential, but they're not significant to what's about to happen as what starts to happen in verse 13. It is significant, of course, that the Israelites, though, observe the Passover during this time. It shows that they still have a strong faith in God and the things He's commanded them to do, since they're obviously still observing things like that, still following His command and observing these feasts. That's definitely going to be something to keep in mind later. Also, the fact that they were eating of the crops of the land. It mentions that there too in those 2 verses or those 3 verses. That kind of indicates to us too that they weren't hungry necessarily, at least. They weren't tired. They might not have been getting manna from the Lord anymore, but they were still being taken care of. And again, that's going to be important later, that they are seemingly in good health. They're in pretty good spirits. They were able to eat, find nourishment, and have their strength, which is a good thing because they're going to need that strength. They're going to need to be ready to face the things that they're going to have to do to take this land that the Lord is delivering them to. But something that I hope we have all started to see so far in this study is that the entire account of Joshua, the whole book, is about, it's all centered around having a strong faith, about having courage, having faith enough to trust in God to be strong and courageous when we face these trials. While the account of Joshua itself is about Joshua, it's about Joshua leading God's people and them having faith enough to trust in God to deliver them into the promised land. For us, it's about showing us how to have faith in God enough to be strong and courageous to do anything that He's asked us to do. No matter how difficult it may seem to us, no matter how much we may not want to actually do it, how much we'd rather do things our way, it's always better to have faith in God, to trust in His strength, and to be courage in all the things He commands us to do. So now we come to the end again of Joshua 5, where we're going to be picking up in verse 13. And the scriptures here start to give us another image of the type of faith that we should have in order to say that we are God's people, that we belong to the Lord. And so in verse 13, we read, "When Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua approached him and he asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied. "I have now come as commander of the Lord's army." And then Joshua bowed his face to the ground in homage and asked him, "What does my Lord want to say to his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did that. This is an amazing moment here that occurs just before Israel truly starts their conquest of the Promised Land. It says Joshua is near the city of Jericho, and suddenly he sees this man standing, and it says that he has his sword drawn in his hand. Now, a drawn sword doesn't mean that this guy is ready to go lay down and take a nap, or he's just going to go have an exchange of words and maybe come to some peaceful resolution. This man is ready to fight. This sword in his hand, he's ready to swing, not with it in its sheath, but with it drawn. And so Joshua approaches him and he simply asks him, "Are you for us or are you for our enemies?" And again, the man answers, he says, "Neither, for I have come as a commander of the Lord's army." Now, this may seem like a strange answer to us because it doesn't really seem to answer the question, are you for me or are you for my enemies? Do I need to be afraid of you? Do I need to defend myself from you or plan a counterattack? Or are you going to join our ranks and come fight with us? Any other person would ask, how can this man with a drawn sword not be on either side? But Joshua understands exactly what this person is saying. He doesn't ask for context. He doesn't say, well, what is that supposed to mean? He already knows. Because this man is the commander of the Lord's army. That's enough for Joshua. That's all he needs to know. And he falls down to the ground. He bows before this man. And then Joshua just simply asks, "What message do you have for me?" And the message was simply to take off your sandals. Take the sandals off your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. That's the message. That's the whole message. That's all that we're given in this context. Nothing else is recorded for us. But again, this is all Joshua needs to know. So that's all we need to know. This scene replicates the beginning of the Exodus account with Moses. We remember that God comes to Moses in a burning bush, and the message in Exodus 3 and 5 was exactly the same. He says, "Do not come near, but take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." Joshua is experiencing this same exact account, this same thing. He's seeing the same thing that Moses went through. And it's just another example of Joshua now being this leader that Israel needs during this time, becoming the new Moses for God's people. He's come into the presence of God, and therefore he finds himself on holy ground. And since this commander of the Lord's army doesn't tell Joshua not to worship, you can be assured that this is, at the very least, a messenger of God. This is holy ground in the presence of God himself. And the message is that God is going to go ahead and fight for his people. Now, whether Joshua is going to be on his side, that's another question. But the Lord is there, and the Lord is going to provide a way for his people. Just think about the answer that this commander of the army gives to Joshua. Joshua asks whose side the commander's on, and the commander says neither. So the question is not to ask, is God on my side? The question is, am I on God's side? Whose side am I going to follow? The commander of the Lord's army has arrived to go ahead to lead the Lord's army into victory and give victory for God's people. And so the question instead for Joshua is, are you on his side? God will fight for you, but not because he's on your side, but because you are on his side. Too often we want God to be on our side. What I mean by that is we want God to validate us. We want him to say, you're doing the right things. You're going in the right direction. Continue following your wisdom or chasing after your desires. We want God to be on our side. But that's not how God operates with his people. We want God to support everything that we do, but that's not how it works. He is God, and we are his creation. It's not about getting God on our side, but it's about us getting ourselves onto God's side. God is the one leading the way, and the question is, are we going to follow him, or are we trying to get God to follow us? So, with that understanding, that we need to follow God, that Joshua needs to follow God and put himself on God's side and follow where he leads, the Lord then comes to Joshua and sort of delivers the plan of attack. If we pick up in verse 6, we're going to read the first several verses here, probably down to about verse 14. So we pick up and it says, "Now Jericho was strongly fortified because of the Israelites. No one was leaving or entering the city. The Lord said to Joshua, 'Look, I've handed Jericho, its king, and its best soldiers over to you. March around the city with all the men of war and circle the city one time. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horn trumpets in front of the ark. But on the 7th day, I want you to march around the city 7 times while the priests blow the ram's horns. When there's a prolonged blast of the horn and you hear its sound, have all the troops give a mighty shout, and then the city wall will collapse. The troops will then advance, and each man will go straight ahead.' And so Joshua, son of Nun, he summoned up the priests, and he said to them, 'Take up the Ark of the Covenant, and have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns in front of the Ark of the Lord.' He said to the troops, 'Move forward, march around the city, and have the armed men go ahead of the Ark of the Lord.' After Joshua had spoken to the troops, again 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns before the Lord moved forward and blew the ram's horns, and the Ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. While the ram's horns were blowing, the armed men went in front of the priests who blew the ram's horn, and the rear guard went behind the ark. But Joshua had commanded the troops. He said, 'Do not shout or let your voice be heard. Do not let one word come out of your mouth until the time I say shout. Then you are to shout.' And so the ark of the Lord was carried around the city, circling it once, and they returned to the camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took the ark of the Lord, and the 7 priests carrying the 7 ram's horns marched in front of the ark of the Lord. And while the ram's horns were blowing, the armed men went in front of them, and the rear guard went behind them, behind the ark of the Lord. On the 2nd day, they marched around the city once, and they returned to camp, and they did this for 6 days. Go ahead and read verse 15. Early on the 7th day, they started at dawn and marched around the city 7 times in the same way. That was the only day they marched around the city 7 times. Now, verse 1 of chapter 6 is very important to note. The city of Jericho is ready. They're ready for war. They're ready as they're going to be for battle. The city's shut up nice and tight. Nobody's leaving. Nobody's entering. And these men are ready for war. And I want us to imagine the nerves that these soldiers likely felt as they are finally going up against this first city. They're coming into the land. They're going to conquer Jericho. They're going to start there and start to conquer this land that God is giving them. You know, if you're Joshua, if you're any of his military leaders, if you're any of these soldiers, you're probably wondering, man, I wonder what the plan's going to be. I wonder what we're going to do. I wonder who's going to be in the front. I wonder who's going to be in the back. I wonder where they're going to put me. What weapons do I need to prepare? What all do I need to carry with me? Are we going to maybe build ladders or something to try to scale the walls? Or are we going to go maybe find a big tree and cut it down and try to use it as a battering ram? How are we going to get into Jericho? This extremely fortified city, shut up tight, nobody can get in or out. How are we going to get in? And then God reveals the plan to Joshua. Joshua tells all the men of war that we're going to march around the city of Jericho one time. And we're going to do that for 6 days. And nobody's going to say a word. And the 7 priests are going to carry these trumpets before the Ark of the Covenant. And then on the 7th day, we're going to march around the entire city 7 times. And then the priests are going to blow their trumpet. And when you hear that, well, then you're all just going to shout, and then the walls of the city are going to fall down. That's the battle plan. That's what we're going with. Would you go into battle with that plan? Would you have full confidence and be like, yeah, this is good. This is gonna work out beautifully. I'm ready for this. I might be like, well, I'll sit in the camp and y'all just let me know how that goes. And if those walls come down, I'll meet you there. Why would God want to defeat Jericho with a plan like this? Something that would sound so ridiculous to men of war. These are trained soldiers. This surely sounded ridiculous to these men. Why, in this way, is how God says we're going to conquer Jericho? Why? Of all the things God could do, why this? That's about right. And that's the other thing too. You imagine that the city of Jericho was probably thinking the same thing. They're standing on top of these walls. They see the army coming up, and they're looking down, and imagine you're a warrior of Jericho and you're standing on those walls yourself, just waiting for these people to start shooting arrows or something at you, or start trying to knock down the walls or knock down the gates or climb up to you or something. And you're just standing there and you see them get closer and closer. And your adrenaline starts pumping and your heart rate starts to go up. And you see them just approaching. And then they just turn and start walking along the wall. And they just keep walking. They're just blowing trumpets and they're just circling the city. We're ready for war. We've got the city shut up as tight as we can. All of our defenses are prepared. But rather than battling, the Israelites they're walking around the city one time, and then they leave. And that's it. And then on top of that, not only are they just walking around the city, and you just hear these ram's horn trumpets blasting, but the army themselves are completely silent. It looks like they're honestly afraid to say anything. They don't have a single word, not a single sound comes out of their mouth. The only thing you can hear again is those ram's horns just blasting as they're marching around the city. And then again, they just leave. They just go back to their camp. What confusion there had to be in the city of Jericho after watching that. They're stewing for 6 days, and every time, just think of the chills that these people probably got every day. Not the soldiers, but the citizens, as they hear these trumpets and this army walking around the walls of the city. Every single day for 6 days, the army, the priests, the Ark of the Covenant, they come up to the city again. They just walk around the walls. I wonder if on the 2nd day that the soldiers of Jericho were just as prepared as they were on the 1st day. Or on the 3rd day, maybe were they as prepared as they were on the 2nd day or on the 1st day? On the fourth day, I really want to know what the soldiers are thinking. And maybe they're starting to drop their guard a little bit. Maybe they're like, oh, well, here come those Israelites again. Let me find something to cover up my ears with so I don't have to deal with this again all day. Maybe some of them are leaning over the wall and just hurling insults at them. Just yelling at them, trying to get them to react, to do something other than just silently walk around the walls. Are we going to fight, or are you just going to keep walking around, doing absolutely nothing, getting absolutely nowhere every single day? And yet the army says nothing. They don't reply, and the only sound that you can hear are those ram's horns. That's about right. Nobody knew what was about to happen. What's that? That's right. Yep. We talked about Rahab a few weeks ago now, and how this, from that account, some 40 some odd years before, even Rahab and the current citizens of Jericho, they knew what had happened when God parted the Red Sea, when Moses was there leading the people across as they escaped from Egypt. They knew what God was capable of, and now God's people are just walking around this city. And they're I'm sure I would be pretty afraid of what is about to happen. You've got all this tension just building up. And like you said, people were going to know about Jericho after this, about how the army just walked around the city for 6 days, and then on that last day, when the sound blasted and they shouted, the walls just came down. They didn't lift a finger. They didn't do anything. But at this point right now, this seventh day, as they see the Israelite army approaching, they're like, well, here we go again. They march around the city one time and they're like, all right, let's go home. They're going to go back and we can go home, but wait a minute. They're still going. Where are they going? This isn't what they did yesterday. This isn't what they've been doing all week. So what are they doing now? What's this about? There's still no sound. Israelites aren't saying a word. Nobody is saying anything, and all you can still hear are those ram's horns. You think they've got their attention now? What about the third lap? I think they're getting maybe a little bit more afraid, maybe trying to figure out what's going on. They walk around the fourth, the fifth, the sixth time. That seventh time, something different happens. The priests blow their trumpets with a long, loud blast. Joshua gives the command to shout, and the army shouts. And we pick up in verse 17. The city and everything in it are set apart to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and everyone with her in the house will live, because she hid the messengers we sent. Keep yourselves from the things that are set apart, or you will be set apart for destruction. If you take any of those things, you will set apart the camp of Israel for destruction, and you will make trouble for it. For all the silver and gold, the articles of bronze and iron, they are all dedicated to the Lord and must go into the Lord's treasury. And so the troops shouted, the ram's horn sounded, and when they heard the blast of the ram's horn, they gave a shout, and the wall collapsed. The troops advanced on the city, every man went straight ahead, and they captured the city. They completely destroyed everything in the city with the sword. every man and woman, both young and old, every ox, sheep, and donkey. Joshua said to the 2 men who had scouted the land, "Go to the prostitute's house and bring the woman out of there, and all who are with her, just as you swore to her." And so the young men who had scouted in, they went and they brought her out. They brought Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought her whole family, and they settled them outside of the camp of Israel. They burned the city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. However, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her, because she hid the messengers that Joshua had sent to spy on Jericho, and she still lives in Israel today. At that time, Joshua imposed this curse: "The man who undertakes the rebuilding of this city, Jericho, is cursed before the Lord. He will lay its foundation at the cost of his firstborn, and he will finish its gates at the cost of his youngest." And the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. So again, Joshua gives the command, and the Lord gives the people the city. Everything that the city had was devoted to destruction except for Rahab and for all the people that were in her house. And there's very specific instructions given in verse 18. The people are not to take anything as plunder. All of it, everything that the city has, is to be devoted for destruction, or else trouble and destruction would be brought upon Israel's own camp. So all the silver, gold, bronze, and everything were to be set aside for the Lord, put into the Lord's treasury, and everything else was to be destroyed. This was a military strategy that would never work unless you were on God's side. And while the city is destroyed, again, because Rahab sided with God and sided with God's people, her and her family are spared. And she lived the rest of her life with the people of Israel. Everything came full circle for Rahab and her family. As we talked about a few weeks ago, she found herself named in the lineage of Jesus the Christ himself. And in Joshua it says that he placed a curse upon anyone who tries to rebuild Jericho. And then the account ends by saying that the Lord was with Joshua and his fame was in all the land. So God kept his word to Joshua. God was with Joshua. Joshua decided to side with God, and so God stayed with him. He brought Israel to victory in the most amazing way, by walking in circles, by simply doing what he was told. So why did God choose to accomplish this victory in this way? What is God trying to teach his people and teach the world about himself? And Gary kind of alluded to it a little bit already, but why? Why would we trust in God when he tells us to just walk in circles? I want you to consider that question. And consider this question. Would we be willing to do something so illogical as march around the walls of the city during a time of war because God told me to? It doesn't make any sense, does it? What good does it do to dunk somebody underwater? And it's true, the water is water. There's nothing special about it. But it's because of what happens in the water. It's because that is the way that God has prescribed to his people to make a petition to have their conscience cleaned. That's right. And we only have a couple of minutes left, and there's a couple of things that I do want to point out, and a couple more things that I want to ask. Of course, we've said it. These things don't make any real logical sense in our minds. These things seems like a complete waste of time to just march around the walls of the city, right? When we're trying to conquer this place, and all we're going to do is march around for a week and then go back to our camp. There is no scientific, there's no strategic answer that you can give to show why doing something like this, like marching around the walls of a heavily fortified city, would bring about military victory. It makes no logical sense. And so would you do it? Would you go and would you march around the walls of the city? Would you grit your teeth and do it? Would you do it while complaining about it the whole time? Or would you not go at all? Would you have the faith to walk in circles for 7 days? I want you to consider how often God calls for his people, again, to do the illogical, to believe in the impossible, to believe that you can be saved through baptism in water. How does that make any sense? You think about, I think about Naaman. He was told that he would be made clean from this disease that he had on his skin if he dipped himself 7 times in the dirty Jordan River, as he described it. It makes no sense. It's completely illogical. Why 7 times? Why the Jordan River? Why not somewhere cleaner? Why can't I go back to my own place, my own town and do this? How can a dirty river make a person clean? And Naaman initially rejects the idea. He just complains against God. He says, I'm not doing that. That doesn't make any sense. Give me a better answer. It takes faith to do the illogical. In fact, the writer of Hebrews speaks to this event in Jericho as a great moment of faith. When they write and they say, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. This entire event is the most pure message of faith, and I dare you to find a better one. Why does God do these things? Why tell us to do the illogical? It's so that we can see that there is no way that we can boast in ourselves. God does this so that we remember who is the one who is to have all the glory. So that we will place all of our praise completely upon God. Listen to what the Apostle Paul tells the Christians in Corinth. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, starting in verse 26. He says, brothers and sisters, consider your calling. Not many were wise from a human perspective, not many powerful, not many of noble birth, but instead, God has chosen what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. And God has chosen what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God has chosen what is insignificant and despised in the world, what is viewed as nothing, to bring to nothing what is viewed as something, so that no one may boast in his presence. It is from him that you are in Christ Jesus, who became wisdom from God for us, our righteousness, our sanctification, and our redemption, in order that, as it is written, that let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. Paul says that what God is doing in the world and what God is doing in our lives is using things that are insignificant, things that are despised, things that are viewed as nothing, things that are illogical to our understanding, so that we can see that God has all the power. And so that we will not boast in ourselves, but boast in what God can do for us. There is nothing about Jericho that would allow a single Israelite to think that this victory was because of something they did personally. God doesn't want us to think that we can deliver ourselves, but instead to rely on Him, to put our faith into the things that He has said, and trust that He'll see us through. The cross is what teaches us this. That's what Paul is referencing. How can a cross bring glory? How can a cross save the world? And God showed us through Jesus. One of the most illogical and difficult things that God tells us to do is to have an attitude of the cross. We're not to think of ourselves as something, but instead to think about the best interests of others. Think about ways that we can instead give ourselves up for other people. Give ourselves up for the glory of God. Do we have a faith to be godly when it seems so wrong and so illogical and backwards to do so? Do we have enough faith to walk in circles? Do we have enough faith to crucify ourselves every single day? The weapons of our warfare are not worldly. They're not of the flesh. But we are battling for the Lord. Our weapons include things like prayer. It includes love, sacrifice. It includes the blessings that God gives us. Good works, self-control, all of these other spiritual weapons that we have. But do we have the faith to respond with these spiritual weapons rather than the way that the world tends to respond? Do we have the faith to walk in circles and to just watch the power of God in action? Trust in the Lord for the victory, and don't rely on your own understanding and wisdom. That is what Jericho teaches us. We're going to pick up in chapter 7 next week after this massive victory for the Lord at Jericho. And the story does not get any less interesting from there. But I do appreciate your time. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to get back in here, and we'll have our invitation. If you've got a songbook and want to turn over to number 81, that'll be an invitation song tonight. I don't usually do things like this, but I don't have anything written down for what I'm about to say. So if I end up talking in circles or something like that, just Stacy, just come up here and pull me off the stage and we'll start singing. But I was doing some study and reading some things online, and I ended up down the good old YouTube rabbit hole and found a video from Steve Harvey's TV show, his daytime TV show that he has, and he shared a really compelling story, and I just want to share it with you all tonight as well. It blessed me, and I think it might bless you all too. So as it goes, he says that he was 16 or 17, and he just kind of started his first job, and he had this old car that was sitting out in his mother's driveway, sitting up on cinder blocks, and he had worked on it over time and tried to fix it up and get it running, but he could never really figure it out. That wasn't really his thing. But it sat there so long, there were leaves and trash and oil stains under it and everything else. It was a pretty messy sight, and it just was kind of an eyesore. It was in the way a little bit. But as he's working, he gets that first paycheck, and I'm sure everybody remembers their first paycheck, but he was so excited, and he went home, and he saw his mom, and he said, "Mom, I got my first paycheck, and I'm going to get me a new car." She said, "Well, that's good, but your old one's still out there." He said, "Yeah, Mom, I know, but I'm going to save up, and I'm going to get me a new car." So a couple weeks later, he's getting his second check. He comes home. He said, "Mom, I got that check, and I'm really close. We're about to get this new car." She said, "Yeah, that's great, son. I'm happy for you, but that old one's still out there." It's like, man, why does she keep bringing up this old car? I don't care about that car. I'm about to get a new one. And several months goes by, and he finally has enough money saved up. And he comes home and he says, "Mom, I finally got the money. I'm going to get this new car." And she says, "Yep, that's great. But that old one's still out there, And he's finally had enough. He says, what's the deal? Why do you keep bringing this up? I keep coming in here with all this positivity, all this optimism, and excited about getting this new car, and you just keep talking about that old thing sitting out there in the driveway." And she doesn't answer him right away. He says that his parents taught him how to be thinkers, him and his siblings, how to be thinkers. So they let him think on it for a while, and he calls up a buddy that worked at a tow service and gives him $20 to come and tow the truck away. He goes to the hardware store and gets some stuff to clean up the driveway and gets that old car moved out, gets all that trash cleaned out of the way. Everything's all good to go. He goes down to the dealership. He picks him out a new car, and it wasn't new, but it was new to him. Brings it home. He's all excited, and he says, "Mom, look, I finally did it. I finally went, and I finally got this new car." She said, "That's great, son. That's great because you've got somewhere to put it. Because you gotta make room for things. When you come to God and you ask for something, you got to make room so that way you're ready to receive those gifts." And so the question tonight that I ask you is, what's in your way? You got an old car parked in your driveway? Is it sitting up on some old blocks just taking up space? It's got leaves and trash under it. You've got oil stains in your driveway. Your life is a complete eyesore. You're not proud of it. You can't do anything with it. What's in the way? What's keeping you from making yourselves ready for the blessings that await in Christ Jesus? Whatever it is, just turn it over to Him. Whatever you need, whether it's to be baptized, whether to cleanse yourself in the blood of Christ, washed in the blood of the Lamb, bring it to God. Let God tow all those problems away so that you can make room to receive His mercy and grace.
Would you all come forward tonight as we stand and as we sing together?